everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Education Series produced by the Australian Fitness Academy. It's like progressive overload for your brain. I'm your host, Tom Rock, and today's episode I want to talk about hypertrophy. Shout out to Anna who sent this one through. So Anna's a recent Cert 4 graduate, so congratulations on getting through your Cert 3 and 4. Anna, really good stuff. Cannot wait to see what you get up to in the industry. I'm sure you'll have a great time. She also sent a bit of a follow-up to last week's email, which was last week's podcast, which was really cool. So, previous episode, I sat down with Aaron and discussed a little bit about stretching and flexibility, and the benefits and sort of fitting that into training sessions. And Anna sent a really great point about online or the use of programming apps and things like that, and the importance of, obviously we talked about the importance of putting it into clients' programs potentially to improve flexibility and mobility, but she's had great experience using a programming app and delivering her program through that with clients, and that allows them to see the static stretches when they're away from the gym and still have it in their program. And she mentioned this app also, when they go in and do the session, it times their stretches. So say they're doing a hamstring stretch, it'll count down their time as well. So it sort of keeps them accountable on that time front as well. So yeah, a really great point, and a really good tool, those online apps these days, where the client can see their sessions in their apps and work through their program outside of the gym as well, for those little sort of sessions that you might want to get them doing outside of the main session once they have the skills to develop that stretching. So a really good cool tool to keep track of them and make sure they are doing their or completing their programs outside of that, and potentially help hold them accountable. So yeah, great follow-up and really good point off that last week's podcast. And so yeah, really cool. She's also, what she sort of alluded to in her next or into the email as well, is a discussion around hypertrophy and the idea of longer muscle lengths, eccentrics, or eccentric training or eccentric focus training to induce more hypertrophy. And she was saying that there's a lot of information about that these days in online, social media, all these sorts of things, talking about eccentric phases, and then training muscles at longer muscle lengths, potentially stretching before exercise or after exercise, or making sure we're at a stretch during the exercise while the muscles are under tension, and if this improves hypertrophy or increases hypertrophy, if hypertrophy is your goal. And I think it's a very interesting topic to get into. There's lots of research out there. There is research out there, and a lot of people talking about it. I don't want to delve too much into research today. That I might do that on a future podcast, I think. But I think it's a really good topic just to have a general discussion around initially, and potentially touch on research maybe later on. If people really would like it, let me know in the comments, or send me an email if you'd like to hear more of the researchy, I guess, type of view on this. But in saying that, it's a big chat, because when we talk about, there's a few different things that do around eccentrics and lengthened position exercises, and when we're talking about muscles going through a full range of motion, I think that's important. How lengthened they are, it really depends on if a muscle is biarticulate or crosses two joints. Are they in a lengthened position? For example, if I'm doing a bicep curl, I can have like I'm doing a preacher curl, the bicep actually crosses, one of the heads of the bicep crosses the shoulder joint and the elbow joint. So that muscle is going to be shortened if I'm doing, say, a preacher curl. Whereas if I've got my where my shoulder's in a flex position, if my shoulder's in an extended position, that bicep, that head of the bicep is going to be under more stretch when it's completing the exercise. So different muscles will have different leverages throughout different movements, and depending on levers and joint range of motion, joint and what position our joint is in, and where the weight is in relation to that will change where the muscle is under most tension. And it's these sort of ideas talk about muscles being under tension in a lengthened position. So you can look at, like, if I'm doing a preacher curl, for example, has is going to have a lot of tension in the lengthened position, whereas some other bicep exercises, may have more tension when the elbow is in more of a flexed position towards the top of the curl. It might be harder, or is the exercise harder at the lengthened position and it gets easier as I go up. So this sort of change in when the mechanical tension is on the muscle can be a factor in hypertrophy. And there's also a concept of sarcomerogenesis, which is adding sarcomeres in series. So inside a muscle fiber, we've got sarcomeres, which are basically what the contractile unit of the muscle. So they're going to show every time I move, or if I do, say, bicep curl, the sarcomeres in my muscle fibers in my biceps are pulling together, and that's what shortens the bicep. And that shortening of the bicep is going to pull my elbow into elbow flexion. So sarcomerogenesis is the addition of sarcomeres. So basically the muscle fiber is sort of getting longer. It is a way to look at it. More flexible, potentially, but generally we're adding sarcomeres in series if we're talking about stretching a muscle. So that is an adaptation, or hypertrophy adaptation will happen if we're doing lengthened position exercises, or just like tension under stretching will create sarcomerogenesis, where we get that extended or adding sarcomeres in series. This is different to hypertrophy, where we get an increased size of a muscle fiber, which we generally get from mechanical tension and progressive overload. So putting a muscle fiber under tension, as it contracts concentrically, will create mechanical tension, and then that right amount of stress on a muscle is going to help it grow. So in essence, a client or someone may get potentially hypertrophy benefits from lengthened training to a point. Once they sort of get that sarcomerogenesis and it's happened, it's not going to be generally a continuing thing that should necessarily be focused on. I don't believe, like, you're going to get more benefit from focusing on exercise variety. It's great to have some exercises at different lengths and focusing on mechanical tension at different lengths just for variety, so we get potentially more well-rounded hypertrophy, you could say. However, it's not the be-all and end-all for every single client in the gym. Even looking for general hypertrophy, picking one or two variations of bicep curls, doing one is going to be more than enough. Even one is generally going to be fine for most clients. The other thing with potentially eccentric phases, or overloading eccentrics, or doing lengthened position exercises, is you get more stretch on the muscle, creates more soreness, so potentially a longer recovery time, which may impact hypertrophy in the long run too. So if we're just constantly doing these lengthened position exercises, for example, like an RDL every single session, or for many reps, potentially we're looking at extra soreness, which means we can't back up our sessions in 48 hours or whatever our program looks like. So there's a lot to consider when we're selecting exercise, rather than just like, this exercise is slightly better because it's taking the muscle through. Like, as long as the joint is going through a full range of motion, I think that's where you should focus, and then maybe look to vary an exercise, whether it's throughout the week or just over different programs where different joint angles come under the most mechanical tension. And that's sort of another more in-depth topic that you can look at, but it can relate to exercise equipment, all sorts of things about, like, Anna sort of mentioned, lateral raises and cable lateral raises are popular. And when we look at a lateral raise, for example, the hardest part is going to be when we're at the top. So when the weight is pulling straight down due to gravity. When we're at the bottom, there's not that much force of gravity because our arm is down and the weight's not pulling us against our movement. Whereas if we use a cable, I'm going to have more mechanical tension, or more tension on the muscle throughout the full range of movement. So potentially a better exercise for hypertrophy. Not saying that lateral raises with a dumbbell aren't good. So we're looking at potentially the 1 to 5% difference. And not everyone has access to cables, and potentially cables are busy. So doing a lateral raise with dumbbells will generally be fine. So I think it's okay to consider if we're doing a really specific hypertrophy program, looking at loading the muscle through the full range of motion, or how mechanical tension specifically works for each single exercise to target potentially different regions of muscles. However, solely making sure we're in a stretch position for every exercise, lengthened muscle group or lengthened muscle for every exercise, probably unnecessary given the amount of compound exercise I think are going to maximize results for general populations. Generally, stretching and things like that, pre-training, I'm not a big fan of, because that will reduce your ability to produce force during the session. So if I go to a heap of quad stretching, for example, that's going to reduce my force output when I go to do squats. So I think there's a time and place for stretching, definitely. But yeah, I think you've got to weigh up the ability to maximize a client's time in the gym versus should I be isolating every single muscle group, unilateral, bilateral. Do I need to eccentric load and make them super sore so they can't actually train in 2 days' time? So while there's different elements to hypertrophy, generally the best thing is going to be mechanical tension going close to failure, and then progressively overloading that with enough volume or a manageable volume throughout the week, depending on the program split and how it's built up, and depending on the exercises and recoverability. So there's a lot more to go into that. But in terms of eccentrics and longer length muscles, I think there's more to it than just having a longer muscle length necessarily. It will potentially benefit hypertrophy slightly, but it's not going to be the be-all and end-all. If someone's doing exercises consistently with good intensity, close to failure, and they're taking the joint through a full range of motion, they're going to get absolutely great results without worrying too much about making sure we're in the stretch position. But if for a pure hypertrophy program, potentially considering the different points, levers, and where a muscle is under the most mechanical tension, and making sure we're hitting different parts of the muscle may be important. But for the general population, I think we're potentially diving a little bit deeper than what may be necessary to actually get results. But yeah, if you've got any thoughts, you want to hear a bit more scientific content, I guess, on that, happy to do a little bit of a follow-up. But as I said, there's a lot out there. Try not to get bamboozled by needing to fit all this stuff in a program. Individualize it to the client's age, goals, experience, all that sort of stuff is going to come into play too. But yeah, hopefully that answered some of your questions, Anna, or gave you my thoughts on it. If you do have follow-ups, shoot me another email. Anybody else who's got any thoughts, ideas, or questions or topics you'd like me to discuss, send an email to tom@afa.com.au. I'm always happy to chat about anything you guys would like to hear. Other than that, guys, have a great weekend, and I will talk to you all soon.